Thank you to NOLA Mattress for the sponsorship. More about them later in the video. Content warning: this story contains details of an exceptionally violent event involving young children. Viewer discretion is advised. Public safety experts like to say that there's no such thing as accidents. An accident, by definition, is something that happens by chance that has no deliberate cause. There's almost no way it could have been anticipated. But if you study various disasters that have occurred over the years, whether you're looking at a bridge collapse, a plane crash, a house fire, or a fall down a flight of stairs, the thing almost all of them have in common is that something took place that should have been anticipated, that should have been prevented, and that if it had been, the disaster would have never happened in the first place. This is the story of one of these frustratingly preventable tragedies, one of the most horrific disasters in American history. A brand new school building filled with students and their teachers exploded without warning at the end of a perfectly ordinary school day, leveling the structure and killing and maiming hundreds. It was front page news across the country, the nation gripped with sorrow as they listened to harrowing stories of parents desperately digging through the rubble with their bare hands, hoping against hope that their child or children were still alive somewhere underneath. Most of them were to be tragically proven wrong. What made the New London school disaster all the more heartbreaking was that it wasn't caused by an act of God, wasn't flattened by a tornado or bombed by some foreign enemy. It was caused by the same human failings that are at the heart of many such disasters. A failure to appreciate the possible dangers involved in taking particular actions, a woeful disregard of risk, a failure of adequate oversight by government authorities, and a general feeling that saving money was more important than protecting the public. The explosion shocked and chastened the entire country, resulting in a heap of legislation and regulations that have made public buildings safer in order to prevent a similar tragedy from ever happening again. And then, inexplicably, everyone seemed to forget about it. For everyone involved in the tragedy, survivors and the families of those killed, the experience was simply too painful to revisit, so they simply refused to talk about it. The result was, after the headlines faded, so did the memories of the disaster, to the point that today, few Americans have even heard of the New London disaster, which is odd, considering the profound effect it has had on our daily lives. So we decided to share it with you because the one thing the children who died that day so long ago deserve is to be remembered, if for no other reason than to make sure it never happens again. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Ben Edelman. So be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes, and do all the things that feed the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm. Let's get to it. In 1937, America was in the 8th year of the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal had headed off the worst of the economic crisis, but recovery was still a long way off, and there were still high levels of unemployment, poverty, and homelessness across the country. But in a small corner of the state of Texas, it was almost as if there was no depression. There were plenty of good jobs to be had, jobs that paid enough money to keep a family fed and housed. All paid for by the black gold being pumped up from underground, crude oil. The first drill struck pay dirt in East Texas in 1930, just as the rest of the country was sinking into an economic quagmire, and the last of the great oil booms was on. The oil field was massive, 45 miles long and 5 to 12 miles wide, spread out over 140,000 acres in 5 counties. What had been impoverished rural farm country was now some of the hottest real estate in Texas. An entire town sprouted up to meet the demand of the army of oil workers that flooded into the region to work on the thousands of rigs that sprouted up everywhere. One of these new towns was New London, situated right in the middle of what was known as the Black Giant in Rusk County. Now, if you want to sleep better, then you're going to need an extra comfy mattress, and that's where today's sponsor, NOLA Mattress, comes in. I tend to like having a softer mattress when I need to relax, and I also snore, so sometimes it's more than necessary to lay down in another room while wife gets her beauty sleep. We selected a full size, and the model NOLA mattress sent me is absolutely perfect. We had a long night the day before the mattress was delivered, and let me tell you, I wanted to pass out the moment my body hit that pillow. The mattress arrives rolled up in a box, and getting set up is super easy. It literally took 5 minutes to unbox and inflate the mattress and pillows before we were able to take it for a test drive, i.e. nap time.
know. This is just how it ended up being. Do not question the director. No.
Alright, so, we have just now laid down on the mattress, and it is super comfy.
You can make the bed around me, right?
Yeah, totally. You're just gonna nap?
Yeah.
Alright, I think we're gonna keep it. The mattress is super soft and the pillows are incredibly comfy as well. We've had the mattress about 2 months now, and we've got no complaints. Best of all though is that NOLA Mattress delivers it right to your door with free shipping on orders made in the US. NOLA Mattress also has a 120-night sleep trial that allows you to test your mattress out to make sure it's the right fit for you. I love NOLA Mattress, and I think you will too. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com/geographics and use code GEOGRAPHICS to save an extra $50 off your NOLA mattress. This is an additional discount on top of what is being offered on site, so check them out while you can. Now back to your regularly scheduled program. Most of the town's breadwinners were roughnecks, hard men who worked in the oil fields. It was a hard, dangerous job. Men died on the rigs on a regular basis. But the pay was decent, enough to keep a roof over their heads and to give their young children the chance at a prosperous future. One of the biggest benefactors of the local oil boom was the London Consolidated School District, which, like most public school districts in America then and now, was primarily funded by property taxes. Not only had the taxable value of the land within the district's boundaries exceeded $20 million by 1937, but the district's budget was further supplemented by leasing district property to the oil companies, which operated 15 rigs there. In 1932, at a time when over 25% of American workers were unemployed and hundreds of banks were failing, the district spent $1 million, or $23 million today, on a new junior-senior high school building, a 2-story brick structure in the shape of an E that was one of the most modern in Texas. The district was flush with cash, and boasted amenities that few districts of its size could match. Its football stadium was one of the first in Texas to be built with lights, and a fleet of new school buses, which were actually tractor-trailers that pulled what looked like a train car behind them back in those days, fanned out across the district's farms and hamlets on school days, transporting the children to and from the new building. The roughnecks, farmers, and small business owners who made up the majority of the district's families could count themselves lucky to send their children off to such a well-apportioned school. It was a far cry from the rustic one-room schoolhouses many of them had been educated in themselves. But none of them realized that underneath all this modernity was lurking a deadly threat, sleeping quietly and just waiting for the right combination of circumstances to be unleashed. Thursday, March 18th, 1937 was an ordinary day at the New London School, as the locals called it. Hundreds of students were counting down the seconds until the end of the school day at 3:30 p.m. Their younger brothers and sisters in the neighboring grammar school had already been dismissed and were waiting in the school buses to head home once the junior and senior high school students joined them. Normally everyone would have left by now because there was a PTA meeting happening in the gymnasium located in a separate building from the main school. But because the next day was a holiday, meaning no school, district administrators decided that the school day would end today at the normal time. At 3:17 p.m., there was a loud boom that could be heard for miles around, and horrified onlookers outside the school watched as the building was blown to pieces. Witnesses reported that the explosion was powerful enough to blow the roof off the school, blasting it up into the air before gravity sent it crashing back down into the structure, which collapsed after its exterior walls were blown out. A block of concrete weighing more than 2 tons was blasted 200 feet away, crushing a car in the parking lot. Debris rained down in all directions, killing and maiming people who weren't even in the building at the time of the explosion. Bodies were thrown out of the school, ending up hung in trees and on power lines, draped out of shattered windows and laying all over the ground. Almost all of them were children as young as 10. What had been one of the most modern schools in Texas a minute before was now a shattered pile of rubble. Before the dust had even settled, rescuers were already on the scene. These were the attendees of the PTA meeting, mostly young mothers, who had just watched the unimaginable spectacle of the school blowing up with their kids inside it. Now they rushed the school in a panic. pulling out whoever they could from the rubble, but looking primarily for their own children. Initially, those who hadn't witnessed the blast and merely heard the noise assumed an oil derrick had exploded, a not uncommon danger in the oil fields. But word soon spread that the school had been destroyed, and an army of would-be rescue workers descended upon the scene, including roughnecks who brought their equipment including jacks and pulley lines to assist in the removal of debris. Almost everyone in town either had children in the school at the time of the explosion or knew someone who did. Like the mothers from the PTA, most of the rescuers were searching for their own children. As more and more mangled young bodies were pulled from the debris field, however, it soon became apparent that for many parents, it was too late. The disaster was headline news across the country. Reporters from both the major wire services, the Associated Press, or AP, and United Press International, or UPI, sent their veteran reporters to New London, including a young 20-year-old correspondent named Walter Cronkite, who was covering his first major news story. A local radio station in the county seat of Henderson, which had just gone on the air that day, reported live from the scene for hours. The haggard operator not realizing that his broadcast was being picked up by the national networks and carried into homes around the country. The stories were as heartbreaking as they were horrifying. Bodies and parts of bodies being removed from the wreckage throughout the night. Scores of unidentified young children in temporary morgues all over the area, parents having to travel for hours to find their children. In one case, a child was misidentified as belonging to one family and buried, only to be disinterred when the mistake was discovered, forcing the family to have to stage a second funeral. Parents who had lost 2 or 3 children all at once, or who lost one and then had to sit with another one who was horrifically injured, wondering if they would die too. One of the most common expressions written about the disaster was that it was the death of an entire generation. The official death toll was set at 294, including 270 students, but the true total may never be known. When the school was destroyed, it took its enrollment records with it, and with 14 teachers killed in the disaster, no one was sure exactly how many children were in the building at the time of the explosion. Whatever the final number was, it still ranks as the worst school disaster in American history, and one of the worst overall disasters in the history of Texas. In the days following the disaster, there were so many funerals in town that the 3 churches had to hold funerals in batches, multiple times a day, while police officers directed traffic to keep the funeral processions from tangling up. There weren't enough hearses. Children were taken to their eternal rest in the back of box trucks in many cases. Expressions of sorrow and grief came in from around the world. Schoolchildren from as far afield as France and Japan sent telegrams or raised donations. One of the strangest telegrams, though, came from Adolf Hitler, the dictator leader of Nazi Germany, who expressed his sympathy for the victims. The disaster was so overwhelming that almost everyone who saw it, including men who had served in the trenches during World War I, said it was the worst thing they'd ever seen in their lives. Walter Cronkite would go on to become the nation's most trusted newsman, covering the horrors of war in World War II and Vietnam and documenting atrocities ranging from Nuremberg to the Kennedy assassination. Even so, decades later at the end of his career, Cronkite admitted in an interview that New London had stuck with him. "I did nothing in my studies nor in my life to prepare me for a story of the magnitude of that New London tragedy," Cronkite said in an interview in 1987, nor has any story since that awful day equaled it. After the debris had been cleared and the bodies buried, everyone was asking the same question: why? The explosion was so powerful, a textbook was found to have been blasted 2 stories up and embedded in the wooden roof beams, that many people assumed that it had to have been deliberately caused. The idea wasn't as far-fetched as you might think. 10 years earlier, in 1927, a deranged man with a grudge against the local school district detonated a series of bombs in and around the schoolhouse in Bath, Michigan, killing 44, mostly children. Speculation only increased when workers clearing the site found dynamite, but it turned out it belonged to the school. They'd been using it to clear boulders from the side of the football field. To Dr. Eugene Schoch, a civil engineering professor asked by the governor to participate in a court of inquiry tasked with investigating the explosion, the wreckage clearly indicated that dynamite was not the cause of the blast. Evidence instead pointed to something much more ordinary, though no less deadly: natural gas. Oil rigs had been pumping up natural gas alongside crude oil ever since the first wells were dug in the 1850s. Initially considered a nuisance, the gas, which mostly consists of methane mixed with other hydrocarbons, was being increasingly used during this period as a more efficient and inexpensive way to heat homes and cook food than coal gas. However, a lot of gas was considered unusable for this purpose, and was instead pumped back to the oil rig via a waste gas line to be burned off in a flare tower. A lot of homeowners in the area thought that burning up the waste gas was, well, a waste, and they saw nothing wrong with tapping into the line and connecting it to their own home, saving them money since they didn't have to buy commercial gas. It was against oil company policy, but the companies tended to look the other way. In January 1937, the school district superintendent, Chelsea Shaw, made the inexplicable decision to do the same thing after getting permission from the school board. They tapped into a waste gas line belonging to Parade Gasoline Company located 200 feet from the school, rerouting the gas into the building, then canceling their municipal gas contract. At no point, it seems, did anyone consider the potential dangers involved. No one involved with tapping the line was an engineer or had any experience with commercial gas lines, and one of the connections made on the tap line was faulty, allowing gas to leak into the building. Natural gas is odorless and colorless. If it leaks, it cannot be detected except with gas-sniffing equipment. Over a period of days, probably weeks, gas steadily leaked into a crawl space that ran the length of the school building under the basement, eventually filling the entire area with a highly flammable gas-air mixture. Since it was an unregulated line, no one knew the leaks were even occurring. All it would take is a single spark anywhere in the vicinity of any of the gas, and the entire thing would ignite with explosive force. This is what happened in New London on March 18, 1937. In a basement classroom, Lemmy Butler was teaching a shop class. At 3:17 p.m., according to surviving witnesses, Butler plugged in an electric belt sander and switched it on. An electrical arc, a brief spark which under any other circumstances would have been harmless, was enough to blow up the entire school. The school had been using the tap line for just over a month at the time of the blast. The amount of money they saved amounted to $250.84, less than $1 per student killed in the explosion. Let that sink in. Many people, particularly parents of children killed in the blast, were out for blood when they found out the cause of the disaster. How could one of the wealthiest rural school districts in the nation be so stupid, so cheap, as to do something so dangerous in order to save a few dollars? But nobody was held legally responsible for the destruction of the school, for the simple, outrageous reason that nobody had broken any laws. In fact, there was a major loophole in government regulations, not only in Texas but across the country, that allowed people to build and modify public buildings without any oversight from the authorities. No verification that people doing the work are qualified to do so. Even so, the school superintendent Shaw was found guilty in the court of public opinion, forced to resign soon after the blast and take a regular teaching job at another school to avoid starving. Shaw, who'd lost one of his own sons in the disaster, never recovered. He died a broken man, a social pariah who was plagued by visions of dead children the rest of his life. Shocked into action by the disaster, the Texas legislature passed sweeping reforms to the state's building codes, toughening up safety standards for schools and other public buildings and requiring anyone practicing engineering in the state to be professionally certified. They also passed a safety bill that today is so ubiquitous hardly anybody even thinks about it. The requirement that all natural gas should be treated with an odorant chemical to make it detectable in case of a leak. The rest of the country and much of the rest of the world followed suit, so that today, nearly 90 years after New London, gas has a chemical called mercaptan mixed into it, which most people describe as smelling like rotten eggs. The bad smell has saved countless lives by warning building occupants to evacuate because of leaking gas. But 2 months after the New London disaster, the Hindenburg exploded, and New London disappeared off the front page. The survivors and grieving families were left to pick up their lives as best they could, and for most people, that meant not talking about the disaster. The pain was too raw, too universally shared. Basically, everyone had lost someone in the blast. Many of the children who weren't killed suffered from survivor's guilt, particularly if they had lost siblings. Things like talk therapy and treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder were decades away, so most people were left to handle their emotions on their own. The unintentional byproduct of this insular grieving process was that the New London disaster was almost completely forgotten by the country at large, which seems inexplicable, right? But makes sense when you consider that this was only 4 years before the beginning of World War II, a much larger national trauma. It was only many decades after the blast, after the disaster had been all but forgotten, that survivors began to speak out about their experiences and to hold biannual reunions with each other. Prior to that, many of the children attending the rebuilt London school didn't even know what the monument in the street outside the building was commemorating. In 1998, the London Museum opened near the school, which collects primary source documents and news clippings about the disaster, as well as interviews with survivors. They also have the infamous Hitler telegram, so that's something. The museum is seen as an important historical record of the disaster, since almost everyone who witnessed or survived the disaster has passed away by now. Still, for as horrific and impactful as the New London disaster was, it is frankly shocking that so few people today know anything about it. The passage of time certainly plays a role, but it isn't the only answer. Most people have little trouble remembering the Hindenburg, after all, and that disaster had only a fraction of the number of deaths at New London. No, the only logical answer is that the New London disaster was a trauma that was too difficult to bear because of who it affected: innocent schoolchildren. Even today, as jaded and overexposed to violence as we are culturally, bad things happening to children is still profoundly unsettling to us, as it should be. Nobody wants to hear about it or even read about it, which is why we usually stick our heads in the sand whenever a school shooting happens. But we must hear about it. We must remember it, no matter how unpleasant it is. Because the New London disaster is a powerful example of what happens when those responsible for public safety lose sight of their duties. When profit is valued more than ensuring that children come home from school at the end of the day just as happy and healthy as when they left that morning. I hope you learned something today. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical place we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most famous locations. I promise not all videos are as depressing as this. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.